It is the 21st of the 6th, 2025. The time is 10 minutes past 10, and there are very many, as always, F1 centric threads at which we need to pull. We'll talk Briatore talking about the GOAT. We'll talk about Bernie Eccleston too, chiming in on Max versus Lewis as ever. So too, we'll talk about James Vowles, Jimmy V getting himself a brand new contract and extension with a view to ward off the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth. We'll talk about McLaren team orders, Oscar Piastri outpacing Lando Norris, all now. Andrew Benson, one of the goatiest F1 journos to have ever goated, chimes in. So too, we'll talk about what insiders in the paddock are saying about King George Russell of Kingsley and Norfolk, notwithstanding a brilliant performance, the only one to break 1:11 in quali at the Canadian Grand Prix. Some people say that he has a big problem. We'll talk about all the aforementioned. In the first instance, then, let's talk about Briatore. Again, talking about Michael Schumacher, that he was one of the GOATs that I managed him at Benetton. However, I don't know about the best. Who the best is, says Flavio. Techier than Techie thinks. Mr. F1 criminal himself. I don't know the best. I don't know about the best of all time because we've had Schumacher, Senna, Alonso. He told Corriere Stella Sera. Right now, however, quote, Maximilian Verstappen is definitely number one. At this stage, chat, Max glazing, is it glazing really if it's bloody true? Now, Flavio Briatore, for the avoidance of doubt, has agency in there. Keep fighting, Michael. He would be incentivized to give that moniker to Alonso or Michael Schumacher, but no, he gives it to Maximilian Verstappen because it would be disingenuous at this point to argue any different. Apparently, Bernie Eccleston's chimed in too, as he always likes to. He says, previously, I had Alain Prost as my goated one. Now, however, I would say Max Verstappen. He's the greatest. He's the brightest with regards to getting the best out of the car. He doesn't muck around. He gets on with the program. In my list, he's above Hamilton. Oh, the humanity. We're reigniting the goatiest debate. Isaac Hajar yesterday said that he thinks Ayrton Senna was the quickest and that Lewis Hamilton was the best. This is F1 Barbershop talk now. As soon as you start talking about who's the goatiest, that's the conversation done for the night. Oh, and by the way, Jimmy V, new contract settings. This is important for a couple of different reasons. Andrew Benson of the BBC reports that the move from Williams was to secure the 45-year-old on what was described as a long-term deal. They don't report the years anymore of the contract for some reason. Williams declined to comment on the tenure, that they need his leadership. He's taking them back to the mountaintop. They've been brilliant this year. Albon and Sainz scoring points as near as makes no difference every single race. Who knew? Jimmy V himself even said that this was a long-term operation. Don't expect anything out of us for the next couple of years. And in 2025, as soon as now, they are doing bits. The reason why they've given him this contract is obvious. To stave away Mercedes, because they might want a replacement for Toto the boy who cried wolf at some point in the near future. Toto won't want to be team principal for the rest of his life. He's got a son, he's got a family that needs taking care of, and he's at every single Grand Prix as near as makes no difference ever. However, of late you will have seen Toto missing Grand Prix from time to time. Some say, Dana White, UFC head honcho, if you even mention the of retirement, then in your head at least you are already retired. Oh, and by the way, speaking of McLaren, because this is the gift that keeps on giving, the Piastri Lando Norris fiasco. What's going on, Johan? Road Jung, we're going in today. I'm not gonna go long, but we're diatribe. This is important as far as F1 news. So, Andrew Benson, for the avoidance of doubt, all F1 journals are created equally, but some are created more equal than others. Andrew Benson on the BBC F1 website does a cheeky Q&A every single week, and he got a couple of questions this week on McLaren. What do you make of the lack of team orders? He said to that, well, this is the McLaren way, right? This is their culture, their ethos, the rules and parameters within which they operate, and that's a good thing. So long as you get all parties to buy in, then you're pulling all in the same direction. And I agree with that to a certain extent. However, the oldest truism in F1 history is this: if you dilly-dally in a season where it is competitive, then lo and behold, don't be surprised at the end of the season when you've lost yourself a Drivers' Championship. Mention no names, 2007, Alonso and Sir Lewis Hamilton. That's what's happened to them. They dilly-dallied, they hesitated, no team orders, what are we doing here? Singularity of focus was nowhere to be seen. And then what happened in 07? Remind me, chat. I think if I recall correctly, Kimi Raikkonen was allowed to come in the back door and seize the championship of the drivers' variety by all of 1 point. Oldest truism in F1 history, if of course your car is sufficiently dominant where the drivers' championship is not close, where you've only got 2 drivers in the same car fighting, then this is a nothing burger, a non sequitur of an argument. If however it's competitive, if Maximilian Verstappen can keep breathing down the necks of Lando and Oscar, then as at race 24, McLaren, Zak Brown and Andrea Stella might have a problem. Here's what Andrew Benson says, and again the question is written thus: why wouldn't they use team orders? Oscar Piastri has been the quickest all season, long as near as makes no difference. Surely now he's the best driver. The question describes Oscar Piastri's performance as in another league. Andrew Benson takes exception to the terminology, saying that the questioner misconstrues. Here's what Benson says: to describe Piastri as, quote, in another league from Norris this season is a bit of a stretch to say the least. There's no doubt that Piastri has had a better season than Norris thus far and been more convincing of the 2 McLaren drivers, hence his advantage in the championship in their head-to-head stats in both quali and the race, both in terms of outright performance, in terms of outright performance, there is little between the two. And they are more or less swapping the position of faster McLaren driver each and every single weekend. The key this year so far is that Piastri is delivering his best on a more consistent basis than Norris. I disagree, Andrew. I think you misconstrue, sir. It's not necessarily about the consistency. It's about at the peak moments. We've said a gazillion occasions, the goatiest of all F1 drivers and sports athletes. It is in their ability to extract the best out of themselves at the times when they need it most. Not all points are created equally, and much the same as far as F1's concerned. Not all sessions, quali and race are created equally. Lando Norris, case in point, all throughout Canada, FP1, 2, 3, he looked like he had the whip hand. He was the favourite, the bookies' favourite. They thought he was going to nail it. He was nailed on. But then you get to the paid session and all of a sudden Oscar does one of these, flip reverses it. Now potentially it's something to do with the upgrades that Oscar didn't run and Lando did run. But again, this is all in the cerebral, right? Why is Oscar, here's the question, why is Oscar making consistently better decisions than Lando Norris? Why is he able to endure and withstand, perform despite the pressure, not because of it? Why? These are questions that Lando needs to answer for himself right now, because I still have no doubt that sans pressurized circumstance, Lando Norris is the quickest driver of the McLaren drive. I take that to the bank. I don't debate that for a second. That's the feeling that my heart is, my F1 spidey senses. But as soon as it becomes pressurized, as soon as they're playing for all the marbles in a qualifying championship, all of a sudden Oscar flips the switch and looks like he's never not been the better driver. Turtle, you're a legend. Daniel, it's techie out here. Visual, best of luck, Turtle. Yeah, best of luck, Turtle. I hope everything goes well, mate, because it's health is wealth. Do you know what I mean? And I know that you're going for it. Go on then. Let's talk about this McLaren thing because it's important. Benson continues. The key is that Piastri is delivering on a more consistent basis. We've addressed that. Consistency isn't just it. That's ground zero. It's about the peakiest of moments, isn't it? Canada was a case in point, says Andrew Benson. Had Norris strung his qualifying together, he would probably have been ahead of Oscar Piastri on the grid. In which case, he would have likely finished ahead of it. Ifs and buts, though, Andrew Benson, do you know what I mean? What are we doing here? The same could have been said of Saudi Arabia, Miami, in Jeddah. Norris crashed in qualifying, so he's the bloody faster driver. I think it would be disingenuous to argue anything different. I think when he puts it all together, if you look at the hypothetical best laps, the theoretical ones, it's always bloody Lando, but he just fails to pull it together. He's failing, his foibles, multitudinous of them, at the altar of execution. It isn't about ability. It's about pulling it together at the times where, have you ever done one-shot qualifying in F1? It's a skill in of itself to be the best when you need it most. Bring the best out of yourself at the times when you need it most. It's a skill in and of itself. That's why Lando needs to pick up the phone to bloody Nico Rosberg, so he can get some tips and hints. Benson continues, saying could have been said of Saudi Arabia. There you go. There is no doubting. Here we go. Here's the crux point under which we have this conversation. There is no doubting, Andrew Benson says, Norris's speed, but it's also undeniable that he's making far too many mistakes this season. He knows it, the team knows it, and they're trying to help him with it. Help him then. He needs to help himself though too. This is all mental. 80% of this is mental. 20% of this is physical at this stage for Lando Norris. However, I don't want to do the revisionist history thing. Thinking back about the Canadian Grand Prix circumstance, a couple of things stick out for me. We'll come on to George Russell shortly, I promise, because this is going to get techier than techie things. But as far as Oscar Piastri, he's becoming a champion before our eyes. There are similarities between him and Maximilian Verstappen, but they are not the same. Of course, they're not. I'd argue that Max Verstappen is probably quicker, much quicker than Oscar Piastri in equal machinery still. Much more of a champion, much more battle hardened than OJ Piastri, given his experience. Mention no names, 2020 and 2021. However, when you're watching Oscar Piastri, when you're seeing how this dude moves, something happened at the Canadian Grand Prix that I think, in my humble opinion, has gone unnoticed. And it was the mark of the champion. The fact that he ceded happily the place to Kimi Antonelli. He didn't even fight him. Why did he do that? Some will say, well, he's not a racer then. Why would he open the door to Andrea Kimi Antonelli? Well, the reason is because he's not fighting for a race victory. He's fighting for a championship now. He understands crystal clear his strategic objectives. He's not going to destroy a race for fighting Kimi Antonelli. What for? No. He's got bigger objectives, bigger deals, bigger fires for which he needs to fight. Like, that's what he's dealing with. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is dangerous. You heard me say at the outset that I think there are similarities. They are similar but not the same. Max and OJ Piastri. This is one of their similarities. If you let Maximilian Verstappen get ahead in the championship, he's very difficult to beat. And I think that's what Oscar is becoming. Super difficult to beat. You're going to need stuff, fortuitous circumstances, Oscar DNFs, reliability issues, because he knows that he's playing defense now. This is the Sicilian from Oscar Piastri. He's playing chess, not checkers. And so that 43-point gap between Oscar and Maximilian Verstappen now, over the remaining 14 races of the 2025 championship, I feel is going to be really difficult to overcome. Oh, the humanity, chat. Telling you. It's going to get techie out here. Go on then, let's talk about George very quickly. Techier than techie things. Oh, the humanity indeed. Go on then. Insiders are saying a couple of different things about George. And let me put some respect on George's name in the first instance, because George hasn't been too bad. Some would say that George has been the driver of the year. A couple of mistakes early, but since then he's lent into his circumstance. Again, has been performing despite these difficult contractual circumstances, not because. We know that his contract runs out at the end of the year, and Toto, the boy who cried wolf, will stop at nothing to get himself one Maximilian Verstappen. We know that. They've already had conversations. Miami Grand Prix weekend last year, so too the summer break. Toto will not stop if he can get a whiff of the signature of Maximilian Verstappen. Take that one to the bank. You know it. How do you not know it? Well, you see the way that Toto Wolff has been defending Max Verstappen at each and every single juncture. Even when he yeets it into his sky in George Russell, it was all about, Max Verstappen is one of the greatest ones. You know what I mean? Sometimes the great ones see the world as us against them. And that's not necessary. But again, that is a trait of the great ones. Toto Wolff's words, not mine. He's desperate to foster up a curry favour with Team Verstappen with a view to get that signature. He wants him desperately to supersede one King George Russell. And that George Russell performs in that circumstance. He's the only one at the Canadian Grand Prix to break the 111 barrier with a pole lap of 110 something. Speaks to his mental fortitude. You know what I mean? Start contrast to Lando. Can you imagine Lando Norris performing under these circumstances? Not on your Nelly. And that's why George is cut from a different club. I've got to put some respect on his name. He's been very, very good. However, insiders in the paddock per F1 oversteer legends of the F1 aggregation game. Apparently, insiders are saying that George is doing too much. Chat, he's doing a good job, isn't he? Isn't he, Turtle? I don't disagree, mate. What's going on, Daniel? Kayla back in the chat. Go on then. Apparently, they're saying that George Russell is doing too much, trying too hard. Now, so Lewis Hamilton fans, stands and extremists, fundamentalists all around the world have been saying this for the longest time, that George gets on my nerves, that he grinds my gears. Why isn't he wiping Lewis Hamilton's bottom for him? Why doesn't he slow his roll? Well, the answer to that, of course, it's a non-rhetorical question, is that George is self-serving. He's a killer of an F1 driver. Go ask Jack Aitken if you don't believe me. That dude only wants to win, much like Maximilian Verstappen if we're playing similarity dot games. However, some have said that George Russell does too much, that he tries too hard, offers too much vocally. Here's what I mean. This article continues. F1 insiders think George Russell's trying too hard. In the first instance, he feels and looks and smells like the head boy that also wants to kiki with the boys. He, of course, is the director, the driver's representative at the GPDA alongside one Carlos Sainz Jr. He's the head boy, isn't he? But then I don't want to talk to the head boy about F1 things. And you get that sense from the drivers when you see them interact with each other pre a race, pre a session, or even post a race. It seems like Max Verstappen up until recently has never liked George Russell. It shocked me, the stark contrast. All of a sudden they're talking and having conversations. It looked and felt weird. I don't feel like people love George Russell. Alex Albon and George, once upon a time, good friends. Lando Norris and George, once upon a time, very good friends. Carlos Sainz too. But it feels like George does one of these. Again, potentially at the altar of trying too hard and saying too much. This article, courtesy of F1 Oversteer, continues that some in the paddock feel that the Englishman is too keen to wade into public debates. Mention no names, the Qatar Grand Prix last year, when he had lots to say about Max Verstappen and the incident in the steward's room. He told me that he was going to put me on my head into turn one. My parents have raised me this way, that nobody will walk over me, especially not Max Verstappen. If Max Verstappen, George's words, not mine, if Max Verstappen had lost Abu Dhabi 2021, then Michael Massey would still be on the run for his life. George Russell's words, not mine. The question goes something like this. Are those the words that you would expect from the director of the driver's representative at the GPDA? Probably not. Do I understand why he'd say something like this? Again, if he's only invested in Durable Competitive Advantage PLC, 1000%, of course I would get that, because there is advantage in that sort of sledging and brinksmanship. But is that too much as well? Are those two entities mutually exclusive? Probably not. George Russell, continues this article, should no longer be classified as a young driver. He's mature, he's experienced, a veteran almost. He's been in F1 as long as I can remember. So should he still be playing these games, talking so much? Non-rhetorical question, a question to which I don't know the answer. In fact, continues this article, he'll reach 150 Grand Prix this year. And he's also becoming something of a mentor figure to rookie teammate Kimi Antonelli. While he understands their interest in Max Verstappen, their lead driver, he's trying to put the team under pressure. One report claims that George Russell is actively fueling links to Aston Martin. So here's where it gets techie. If Toto, the boy who cried wolf, is actively out here pursuing Maximilian Verstappen, then why shouldn't George Russell have a conversation with Ollie Oaks, have a conversation with Fabio Briatore, make sure the pictures get leaked? This is brinksmanship. This is negotiating, bargaining power now. People are saying though that this is nonsense. This is just George Russell's team putting it out there with a view to enhance his negotiating power, that he's never going to go and drive for Alpine, and then it's almost transparent, it's loud in how obvious that that's a dummy. There's nothing, that's not true. The Aston Martin rumour, I think, holds more credence. That potentially could happen, but the Alpine, you're telling me that King George Russell is going to leave Mercedes to go and join Alpine? It's almost transparent in how try hard it is. Oh, and by the way, if you're talking about try hard, this is why Lewis Hamilton fans hate George Russell all around the world, stands, fans, extremists, fundamentalists. George Russell had some things to say about Lewis Hamilton and the reason why he's struggling at Scuderia Ferrari. Now, in the first instance, there's a thing called respect. Who is George Russell to chime in on Lewis Hamilton's foibles, struggles at Scuderia Ferrari? Some would say that he's trying to do something different, an unprecedented thing in winning an 8th World Drivers' Championship. How many, George, have you won career to date? If I recall correctly, the answer is 0, none. So who are you to chime in Lewis Hamilton's troubles? There is a certain meritocratic hypocrisy in George Russell, and that's why people really do not like this dude. He says of Sir Lewis Hamilton that he's a 7-time champion and he will want to continue dining at the restaurant of sporting endeavour par excellence. Therefore, he may be trying too hard, braking too late, trying to take too much minimum speed through some of these medium high speed turns, through which he doesn't have the confidence in his rear, the suspension, the lack of rigidity. Maybe he's trying too hard. George Russell's words, not mine, about his old mate, his old mentor, Sir Lewis Hamilton. And herein lies the problem. This is the case in point. The latter proves the former. They say that George is doing too much, and then you get the example of him doing too much, chiming in on his old mate, Sir Lewis Hamilton, with whom he still talks, saying that Sir Lewis is trying too hard. I tell you who's trying too hard, King George Russell of Kings Lynn, Norfolk. You are. You're trying too hard. You've been trying too hard. Indeed, you are a try-hard. Now, of course, there is durable competitive advantage in that. Some people say that you can't hate him for wanting to be the best driver, for optimising for his circumstance. Nico Rosberg said over the course of the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, didn't he? Or on the Sky F1 podcast even, that George Russell is the one who's making some lifestyle choices. You see that see the way he's fastidious as far as his sleeping practices, brings his own pillow, makes sure he optimises for every single one of those circumstances which can potentially yield lap time and so advantage. That's who George is. But is that try hard? Are those two things mutually exclusive? I would argue not. Visual says Imola isn't as die hard as Monza. I haven't been to Monza yet, but that's the impression I've got. So let's go. Ferrari jacket around your neck. Is this you saying Ferrari? Okay, we need to talk about Ferrari, Daniel. You remind me. That's the George Russell news. Ferrari, there's a dude who's put out an article. Techier than that, I'm telling you. Proper chaos over humanity. Let me read out this to you. Piero Ladisa. And again, he's a good journo, this one. For the avoidance of that, it's important to set the contextual table here. All F1 journos are created equally, but some are created more equal than others. Do all of these rumours and conjecture ultimately transpire, end up crystallising as eventualities? Not necessarily, but are they worth talking about, especially if the journo is a good one, has track record and credits, therefore? 1000%. Piero Ladisa says on Twitter the following. Now, look, let me set the context. Frederick Vasseur, the pressure around the Italian press and media is doing one of these. It's pressure cooker time, game time, clutch time for Frederick Vasseur. Pull something out of the fire, sir, lest you want to end up as the latest in a long line of names who have tried and failed as team principal of Scuderia Ferrari, the red car with the yellow badge and black prancing horse atop. Of whom are you talking? Cameron, Arrivabene, Mattiacci, Benotto. These are the guys who came and failed within the course of 3 years. None of those lasted more than 3 or 4 years. This is Frederick Vasseur's third year. He said he was going to change 99% of the car and that would yield fruit. It has not yielded fruit. The car is a dog. SF25, the guys and girls over at Ferrari, in particular Charles Leclerc, aka modern day journalist in Sir Lewis' car, are moaning about it now. And tell me about no, bring the upgrades now. Lewis Hamilton said the other day, I don't know why the upgrades are taking so long. Put the upgrades on the car so that I can have confidence in the rear and drive it at 100%. Do you know what I mean? Those are Lewis's words, not mine. The communication, we can go through that between now and the cows come home. Like, do you know what I mean? It's been chaos, absolute chaos. What do you mean? Plan B, plan C, D, E, and what are you talking about? Singularity of focus is what gets the job done in F1. So why are we as Ferrari procrastinating so much? Therefore, Lewis Hamilton is saying in not so many words. Charles Leclerc too. Like, I think I could go faster. Brian Botts, I think I could go quicker, mate, but I will need to go in front, have clean air to prove that. What are we doing here? Nonsense. Again, false seeming has always been the restaurant at which Scuderia Ferrari has dined, right? Even if it's not going well, let's pretend as if it is. Put a brave face on it, and they're not doing that. That's why it's going to be techie at the board meetings, at the annual general meetings where all the shareholders will get together and they will say, in not so many words, that Frederick Vasseur is bringing shame on the family name. Luca Montezemolo told you as much, that as far as leadership, pioneering, disrupting leadership, they've been lacking it for as long as he can remember. Luca Montezemolo, put some respect on his name. They did. They gave him a guard of honour the last time he was on the grid. I say all of that to say this. Piero Ladisa says the following. This is interesting now. Antonella Coletta has no specific experience, and that, by the way, is the dude who heads up the Ferrari program in WEC, World Endurance Championship, Le Mans 24. Since 2023, Ferrari have won each of the Le Mans races. The Le Mans 24 hours, 23, 24 and 25. So don't think for a second that the likes of John Elkann, who, by the way, is obsessed with replacing Fred with Christian Horner, don't think for a second that conversations in Italy won't be happening now to suggest that Antonella Coletta needs to be the replacement for Frederick Vasseur, not next year, but now. Telling you, this is how it works. It's the Tifosi, it's passion, it's get results now, deliver today, sack off tomorrow. It's in the short term now, not medium term. As Ferrari, prior to the Canadian Grand Prix, were 177 points behind McLaren in the Constructors. 177. Lest we forget, as at race 24 last year, they were only 14 points adrift. What are we doing then here? Oh, the humanity. This is what this dude says. And again, he's putting forth as his supposition that Antonello Coletta is the dude to replace one Frederick Vasseur. He says about Antonello that he has no specific experience in F1, but let's not forget that he's been living and breathing motorsports for a very, very long time. He's now an experienced figure in the world of motorsports. Even Jean Todt, when he arrived at Maranello in 1993, had no experience whatsoever in. Do you see what they're doing, chat? Do you see what they're doing? Pushing this guy as the top seed to replace. This is a conversation about who's up next, not whether Frederick Vasseur is going. Not about, we're not talking about the specifics of Frederick Vasseur leaving, whether he should leave. We're talking about his successor now, as if he's already left. God tier journos turning the F1 pressure screw now on team principle of Ferrari. Techier than techie things. Let me finish reading this out. Even John Todt comparisons, yeah. When he arrived in Maranello in 1993, he had no experience of F1 whatsoever. He came from a completely different world, that of rally, having also won some editions of the 24-hour of Le Mans with Peugeot, where he had done very well. So I would be cautious. The problem is the structure of Ferrari, which in these years, between continuous upheavals and resets, has not worked and has miserably foundered. To state, oh my gosh, techie, I don't know, I owe the humanity, chat. Toto lost out on signing Max, says Ollie, this time, but he has made amends for this by signing, has he? Yeah, Max doesn't necessarily make that much sense when you have a Russell embedded there. Oof, Ollie, you're sounding awfully like Peter Windsor there. Don't hate it. Max, are you looking forward to your lunch? Oh, it's chaos. I think there's problems at Ferrari that they will need to solve for ASAP. Now, they won't wait till next year, I promise you. They will be having conversations. Not that they'll sack him now, but that they'll be having these conversations. You can hear it in this chap's tone. He bookends by saying the last aspect is fundamental and has characterised the Todd cycle at the core to the prancing hut. So that he's evoking Jean Todt here, the last one to have not success. 2007 wasn't Jean Todt, right? But to have lasting success, 2000 to 2004 with Michael Schumacher, the last dude to win 5 championships of the drivers' variety consecutively. It's techie than techie things, chat. I'm telling you, the weird and wacky world of Formula One continues. The narratives and plots ensue. T-minus 7 days until we get ourselves the Austrian Grand Prix, if I recall correctly, between now and then. we'll try and talk later. So apparently it's somebody's birthday. They said there might not be a Saturday show. Apparently I can't enunciate anymore as well because I'm so bloody tired. You guys have been legends. Between now and next time, as always, the prosecution rests. No further questions, Your Honour.